the Afroscope podcast, a gospel voice proclaiming the good news of Jesus amongst all nations and peoples, seeking holiness, justice, and transformation. This podcast is exclusively brought to you by the Association of Evangelicals in Africa. The Afroscope podcast, from Africa to the world.
Welcome to the Afroscope podcast for another episode. My name is Danson and I'll be your host. The Afroscope podcast is an opportunity for Africa and the evangelicals in Africa to engage in conversations as it regards to the unity of the evangelicals and the proclamation of the gospel. With me today we have Mr. Matthias Boehning, and Matthias Boehning comes to us from the World Evangelical Association, WEA. I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us something about you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danson, for having me. It's a great honor and pleasure to be in this podcast. My name is Matthias Boehning, and I'm coming from Bonn in Germany. That's where I live with my family, and I have the pleasure to co-direct, together with my Californian colleague, Dr. Chris Elizara, the WEA Sustainability Center. So what do we do at the Sustainability Center? We deal with sustainability issues, environmental issues, creation care issues in two ways. First of all, we strategically engage the UN and different UN organizations that are dealing with sustainability. That's why we are located in Bonn, because Bonn, over the last couple of years, has become an important hub for sustainability inside the UN system. For example, UNFCCC, the UN Climate Change Secretariat, is headquartered in Bonn, along with other organizations like the SDG Action Campaign that deals with sustainable development goals. The other way we are dealing with these topics is to inform and equip the global evangelical community on these issues. So we translate the sometimes difficult and technical language of global sustainability conversations into the language of day-to-day living, day-to-day believing, day-to-day church building.
Yeah, one of the very, very intricate things about your role as the co-director of the Sustainability Center at WEA is to encourage the church, the evangelical church, to think about creation care. So my question is, the church in Africa continues to face a tremendous grace and growth in gospel advancement. So as an environmentalist, as an environmental sustainability expert, what are your thoughts on the relationship between the church in Africa and creation care?
I think gospel advancement is a perfect keyword, because that's what it's all about. Yeah. We want to advance the gospel. Our specific contribution as a sustainability center is to unpack what we mean if we say gospel advancement. Yeah. The gospel is the good news, as we say. Yeah. And one of the key verses I think every child learns when it grows up is John 3:16, where it says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son." And the interesting thing is, sometimes we need to think to unpack the different words in that. And if we unpack the word world, we get an understanding why God has sent Jesus into the world. Mm-hmm. And the word world in this verse is coming from the Greek word cosmos. Mm-hmm. And most of the time we understand the gospel as being for entire humanity, for being the humans. Yeah. But if we understand the word cosmos, it means actually all of creation. Mm-hmm. And this is an interesting opening up for our understanding, also for our theology of gospel. God has sent his Son as the good news to all of creation. And this is a starting point for us to say, let's unpack what we mean by gospel, let's embrace the full gospel. And if we go back in the Bible into Genesis, it's our first mandate to build and protect the creation, the precious creation we were given by God. Yeah. And we talk so much about the second mandate, the Great Commission. Let's also talk about the first mandate that we were given right after creation, to build and protect his creation. And for us, it is very interesting if we go from John 3:16 to Romans 8, verse 19, where it says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." Or in another translation, it says, "For that future day when God will reveal who his children really are." So who are we as his children? Who are we as the church? Let's be the church that cares for creation, and where the groaning of creation stops, because we are bringing the good news of the gospel to all of creation.
This is exciting to listen to you talk about the role of creation care and unpacking that in the context of the Great Commission. And one of the things that African evangelicals are probably asking themselves as we talk about this is, how can Africa join the world in obeying the command of the Great Commission, not only in preaching the gospel, but also caring for creation? What would you say about that?
I think the really, really nice thing about being a believer, being a follower of Christ, being a child of God, and being the church, is that we can apply the full creativity of living out our faith and living out the gospel. And this is what we encourage the church to do. It's not adding another task onto your busy schedules, onto your workload that we know the church should deal for so many different things and so many topics. And now there's another thing coming on top. No, it's about being creative, how we can love God and love our neighbors. That's what we always say. And if we love God and we understand God as creator God, automatically a creativity comes into action inside me, in my heart, in my mind. How can I love God very practically by caring for his creation? Starting with my immediate environment, starting with the community I live in, starting with the problems that are in my community. Do I have a river that is maybe polluted, or that is maybe very dirty from plastic pollution? Do I have plastic pollution in my community, where it's a simple matter of picking those plastic and bringing it somewhere? Are there other things where I can maybe make a lifestyle change in order to reduce my carbon footprint? And then moving on from loving God to loving my neighbor. In a globalized world, we can increasingly understand my neighbor as my global neighbor. So if I know from science that the detrimental effects of climate change are causing my global neighbor, who's maybe a farmer in India, to have horrible effects on his on his livelihood as a farmer, because the weather changes, because the climate changes, then I understand this story of the Good Samaritan in a very new way. Because what does it mean in the year 2022 to love my global neighbor? It means that I should also take care of my own lifestyle that is maybe adding to the global changes which we are seeing that are detrimental to so many people.
Are there any practical things that WEA Sustainability Center is doing, especially with church leaders, that you would like to share with the audience in Africa?
Yes, there are several levels. I think first of all, like we always work with WEA, we want to strengthen and encourage leaders to be leaders of these topics, because it changes with leadership. It is so important that church leaders, pastors, preachers, youth group leaders, you name them, that they take up this topic and they really dive into it, and they really digest it, and they really also let the Spirit speak to them. What new areas of theology do you want to open up to me, God? So we really encourage leaders to take leadership on these issues. And we have a couple of resources on the WEA Sustainability Center website that can be seen, that can be downloaded, that can be used. The next thing is awareness and
Yeah.
education on these topics. It's so important. We need to deal with the topics of 2022. Yeah? It is said in Scripture, we are not from this world, but we are in this world.
Yeah.
And if we want to be salt and light for this world, we need to engage with those topics. We need to understand what is climate change, what is plastic pollution, what is biodiversity. Phew. Not easy to understand.
Yeah.
And what can I do to protect and save biodiversity?
Yeah.
What are the effects of chemicals in my daily lives, and what does it mean to a society?
Yeah.
So there are so many topics. What are the sustainable development goals? Engaging with what the world engages with is so key for us believers. So just one practical example, we have published a resource on our WEA Sustainability Center website called The Bible and the SDGs.
Wow.
And it actually goes through all the 17 SDGs.
Amazing.
And it gives you a Bible study on each of those topics. And it gives you the Bible perspective on the topic that is talked to in those 17 SDGs.
Yeah.
And it gives you a practical example how the church can engage on the level of this SDG.
Wow. Wow.
If we have time, I can share a story of how one church that is very dear to me does this.
Wow. Wow. You know what? Africa is eager to know and learn how to join the world in allowing God to use us to serve the entire world through creation care. So given this, I don't mind, but give us a minute for you to share this story. Yeah.
I try to be short on
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
This story is coming from Accra in Ghana, and it really spoke to my heart.
Yeah.
I visited a church on a Sunday, and we had the service together. And after the service, the pastor showed me their plastic waste collection place.
Wow.
It was right next to the church entrance.
Amazing.
Not very beautiful, to be honest. I mean, normally you try and make a
Yeah.
nice entrance to your church and so on,
Yeah.
but right next to it, there was the bins and the big collection things to where people could put their plastic waste. And they encourage believers, churchgoers, to bring their plastic waste on Sundays to get it out of their communities. And then I asked the pastor, I mean, how do you encourage them to bring this waste? And he said, you know what, Matthias? Church on Sundays is about bringing your waste, no matter if it's your inner waste or your outer waste.
That's incredible.
And I still get goosebumps because of that very practical theology and very practical implementation.
Yeah.
This pastor has understood how a church, not a fancy one, not a rich one, not on any measure a special church, but how one church in a community can make a difference and can be salt and light.
Amazing, amazing. And this is the kind of stories we want to hear over and over about how the church is working alongside the Great Commission to take care of the environment and to love neighbor. Mr. Matthias, it has been a pleasure having you on this podcast. Would you just take this last minute to talk to our audience and just share your final comments?
Yes, thank you so much, Danson, for having me and for that opportunity to share some of those thoughts and ideas that are so dear to us. And actually, as a final encouragement, I want to convey to you that really engaging with creation care is not another task that you need to add to your long list, is not another burden, but we are encouraging the church to be the church. That's actually all. And the church, in its beautiful, all-encompassing sense, like we see it in Scripture, is the answer to all of the pressing issues we see in society and we see in this world. So let's be the church.
Thank you so much for joining the Afroscope podcast for this very exciting episode. Until next time, keep it tuned. The Afroscope podcast.
The Afroscope Podcast, a gospel voice proclaiming the good news of Jesus amongst all nations and peoples, seeking holiness, justice, and transformation. This podcast is exclusively brought to you by the Association of Evangelicals in Africa. The Afroscope Podcast, from Africa to the world.